Oh man, I just don't get how someone can be that dumb. The ECB is taking shots at Bitcoin again, and they're saying what's wrong with having a strategic Bitcoin reserve. They're really going hard against Bitcoin here. They're arguing here why Bitcoin doesn't work as a strategic reserve, why that's a dumb idea. Then they dive into it, about the US, the FTP, and Switzerland, where Bitcoin reserve strategies are being planned, and that none of this works. ECB, Schaff, Bindseil argue poorly. Jürgen, Schaff, and Bindseil, they know exactly what is right and what is wrong here. They're really arguing poorly here for sure. We're going to take a look at all the arguments in just a moment. It's almost unbearable at this point. How the traditional financial system is realizing that it's becoming more and more irrelevant. How the traditional financial system is realizing that Bitcoin is here to stay and that it's almost panicking in front of Bitcoin. And then they have to put out these ridiculous articles, just firing them off. By now, this is already the fourth or fifth article that the ECB is just firing off. From the two Bitcoin naysayers, Bindseil and Schaff, who keep taking shots at Bitcoin. But the good thing is you can take this away. Every time they fire off one of these articles, Bitcoin has shot up massively. And that's why we need to see this as a buying opportunity. Price signal and as a mega indicator, because there's nothing better for Bitcoin. There's no better advertising. Like the traditional money system is losing its mind here, is escalating because it doesn't know how to stop Bitcoin, and all that comes to mind for them is to post some ridiculous articles in the FAZ. But let's take a look right now. What is being claimed here? The headline here says in big letters what speaks against a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So here they're just completely overlooking the opportunities, I'd say. Here it's basically just negative. They're not even reporting neutrally here, or something like that, but here they're really just throwing out one negative point after another. Normally, when you write an article like this, you at least start by saying, yeah, okay, there's some level of decentralization, and there are 1 or 2 points here, which might actually be pretty cool, that you might even be able to recognize from the ECB side. But no, we're diving right in here. What's all the crap about Bitcoin to you? Now we're basically getting started. More and more proposals are making the rounds to build strategic Bitcoin reserves. The proposals are still a bit vague, but it's already clear that they don't work, pose economic risks, and redistribute wealth. And then the whole article comes in below. And that's the perverse part of it all. So if you have a perfectly functioning monetary system here, if the euro really worked, then I wouldn't mind putting out articles like that. Then you could say, okay, that is critical of Bitcoin. But if you yourself cannot even manage to somehow stick to the inflation target, if you yourself cannot even somehow create good money, if you yourself are faced with very, very many problems in the Eurozone with France, and who knows what else is coming our way, you can't just shoot from your glass house and pump out articles from your ivory tower. That's just completely out of touch with reality. Just take a look at how systematically it's getting harder and harder to just maintain the lifestyle here due to the devaluation of money, and then basically shoot against Bitcoin here. What a solution for the inflation problem in the Eurozone is. The euro is nothing more than a Bitcoin that's currently depreciating massively against the dollar. The funny thing is, I'm currently here in Paraguay, and I was here with a few Germans. They tried to exchange euros for the local currency here. And apparently they went to 3 or 4 exchange offices. They all said, no, we don't want euros, we just don't want them anymore. And then they asked for a reason, and they just said, no, we don't want it, we don't need it, or something along those lines. Could just be a coincidence. But apparently the euro isn't really welcomed abroad anymore. You can exchange dollars anytime, even though it was an official exchange office. They didn't take any euros here anymore, because they're probably already saying, okay, this is the ultimate Bitcoin. We might still take it. The dollar, it might not be as much of a shitcoin as the euro is. Okay, now pay attention. It says, what's this all about? And then here comes the answer the designated US President Donald Trump has signaled. So first off, the designated US President. And there's also the question here, it's already being framed again. Is Donald Trump being pushed into a corner here? And then they say here, Donald Trump is signaling the seized Bitcoin holdings owned by the USA to turn this into a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Then you basically go on to Sarajevo, which has called for a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the EU. Then you go into the central bank in Switzerland, you go into the FTP here. And then they basically say in the article that this whole thing is nonsense. And we'll take a closer look at all the arguments in detail shortly. They're basically old. That means they keep bringing up the same arguments over and over again. You don't really learn from your past arguments here. You just keep bringing up the same points over and over again. That's basically the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. But to expect a different outcome here. And there are 1 or 2 good critical arguments as well. But the arguments you're bringing up here are definitely not good. So it says, for example, economic risks. wealth is being redistributed. So, just to make this really clear, with Bitcoin, nothing is being redistributed. The euro redistributes money. That means the one who is closest to the money creation source benefits the most. People who are further away from the money creation source, like those who get loans later or those who don't get any loans at all, they only end up dealing with inflation. So here we clearly have a redistribution effect. Can you check that out? The Cantillon effect is officially proven. So the ECB is criticizing Bitcoin here, but they can't even manage the redistribution effect with the euro itself. The ECB argues here that people who have a lot, who bought Bitcoin very early on, benefit from Bitcoin's price rise. That they basically benefit from the massive price increases of Bitcoin. And now the new people are coming in when the price is high. And that's basically the exit liquidity. And then all the Bitcoin whales cash out and buy themselves some villas or something else. And that leads to inflation again. But that's obviously a totally ridiculous argument. First of all, not everyone is cashing out. So a lot of holders, if we take a look, they're not even thinking about cashing out. They just hold on. Some, like Michael Saylor, will hold on until the grave. And secondly, even if they do cash out, what's the problem? So that still doesn't create mega inflation or anything. Those who are creating the inflation here, those are still the ECB folks. If you just expand the money supply by about a quarter or something like that in just a few years. So this is obviously the driver of inflation, not that. The Bitcoin that they somehow sell 2 or 3 of here to buy themselves. At some point, buy a house. It goes on to say here, that's why most economists, convinced that Bitcoin is a speculative bubble, that will eventually burst. And that's really, really interesting, because here you're basically saying that most economists assume, well, I don't know which economists you're talking about. So I know some economists like Leo Mattis or Alex Frankenberg. That was just a joke, of course. Because economists really don't want to be mentioned in the Bitcoin scene at all. Be mentioned because economists seem to have a bullshit job. So basically, you only need an economist in a redistribution mechanism. If we have a socialist system, we need some people playing God, saying what the right money supply is, what the right inflation rate is, and so on. And the economists in the Bitcoin world, they really don't do anything. They might just be observing. But the economists in the fiat world, they basically set the rules. Socialist guidelines like Marcel Fratscher's, who then says, hey, we need to expand the inflation target to 4%, because that's way better, because then we can print even more money. Then we can seize even more from the people. And so there are a lot of smart folks in the fiat world who call themselves economists or something like that. And sure, they might not think Bitcoin is that great, but I wouldn't say that most economists are like that either. Because more and more economists are realizing that this is basically a bullshit game, where they're just not interested in participating anymore. For example, there's a guy named Rahim from the Austrian Smart Folks. He was also on my podcast. I mean, in the podcast, I called him an economist because a lot of people always refer to him as an economist. I can say to him, but he also says, hey, I don't want to be called an economist. He is Bitcoin. And it's almost an insult to call him an economist here, because economists are always those people in the fiat world, in the traditional world, who think, okay, we can solve problems by printing money, and the more money we print, the more wealth we can create. And that's just nonsense, really. Let's take a look. Marcel Fratscher's forecasts, one was worse than the other. And in the end, are these the people that the ECB or something like that relies on? Then she says, okay, here, Marcel Fratscher said Bitcoin is bad. And Marcel Fratscher's, his Bitcoin forecasts were all completely wrong too. Marcel Fratscher, Bitcoin forecasts were all completely wrong. He then said, really bad, pyramid scheme, blah, blah, blah. It's just all crap. And here, one idiot is citing another idiot, but I have to take that back. Because otherwise, I'll either get another house search or not again. I've never gotten one before, but you have to be careful here when you label people as idiots or something like that. So I take that back. But I mean, I'm in Paraguay anyway now. So here you can feel free to search my house. I have nothing to hide here anyway. Then here's an interesting statement. Even if the price of Bitcoin kept rising forever, the latecomers would end up poorer, and their frustration over their dwindling purchasing power could destabilize society. That's obviously a totally ridiculous argument. Bitcoin is there to basically make your life better and my life better, to make all our lives better. That is, in a Bitcoin standard, it is like this was all shit. Like crazy hot to tiles back there. I almost burned my feet. Now I'm here by the pool. Definitely, Bitcoin is there to make our lives better, to make things easier. Not to make our lives harder, you know. Because that's basically it in a fiat standard. Your life just keeps getting more expensive. But with Bitcoin, it gets easier. And it doesn't matter whether you bought in early or late. I always say that too. For example, you're just now using the car and basically switching from horse to automobile. Then you still have an advantage. It's the same with Bitcoin. Even if someone comes to Bitcoin in 10 years, they'll still have an advantage compared to people who still aren't using Bitcoin. And that's why you can't say that Bitcoin somehow makes people poorer or something like that, but everyone can benefit from it. It doesn't matter if he uses Bitcoin now or if he uses it in 100 years, because the other option would be not to use Bitcoin and to save in fiat money. If you don't use Bitcoin and saving in fiat money, I just need to get my feet a little wet here so that I can walk back over here, because otherwise it's too warm. If you're not using Bitcoin here and instead using fiat money, then you're facing some serious problems. That you get expropriated here, that you get inflated out of your money, that the cost of living keeps going up. And in the Bitcoin standard, the cost of living gets cheaper and easier, like it really should be. And that's basically what the chief economists here don't really seem to get. Of course, there are still things like that here. Standard arguments like how mining is an uncontrollable technology. Energy consumption, that's not true either. By the way, here in Paraguay, there's the largest or one of the largest hydroelectric plants, the Itaipú, or whatever, I don't know what it's called, where all the Bitcoin miners are hooked up. That means they have so much electricity in Paraguay that they can't even use it all themselves. That all gets shipped over to Brazil or something, and they have surplus energy there. You can hardly imagine it. That's why there are so many here, Bitcoin miners. And the Bitcoin miners here basically just take the electricity. That isn't really taken anywhere else. I was thinking about going there too, but that's a bit too far to go to the dam. But it's crazy that Paraguay is basically so self-sufficient. Energy self-sufficient because you have such a huge dam here. And of course, Bitcoin miners are a cool technology to basically take advantage of the excess here. Otherwise, you'd have to somehow sell it to Brazil for lower prices or something like that. And then there are just some other, let's say, arguments, failed concept, transactions are cumbersome, slow and expensive. That's not true either. There's now the Lightning Network, hardly used for legal payments, but rather more for money laundering, tax evasion, and financing terrorism. So if that's true, then basically every one of you watching here would be. Every subscriber is then a terrorist, a tax evader, some kind of criminal, a dubious person. So, are you really that criminal? Are you really that shady of people? Are you all really terrorists? Just drop that in the comments below. Then we can check that really quickly here. Is that true? That means it has no cash flow. That's nonsense. The ECB holds gold, and gold doesn't have any cash flow either. You're basically just talking about your own investment here. Bad. Because if you say Bitcoin has no cash flow, then theoretically you also have to sell the gold reserves here. So that makes absolutely no sense here. Then it means it's an inadmissible investment, high risk of loss, and it jeopardizes the credibility of the central bank. Okay, I can maybe understand that a little bit, but I actually see it differently. Bitcoin can actually restore the credibility of the central bank because all of a sudden there's a certain backing again. Basically, a certain asset base that can't just be evaluated. Right now, it's just a bunch of hot air. Then that means no productive use or social benefit. I mean, Bitcoin has the greatest social benefit there is. Saving is suddenly worth it again. Right now, saving isn't worth it. Instead, it's almost better to go into debt in a credit money system. You always have to live on credit. You always have to take out more loans. You always have to leverage even more. You always have to get even more. Rowing in the fiat hamster wheel. And that's ultimately the biggest benefit that Bitcoin offers here. That it brings peace back into your life, that it calms you down again. Then we have here, wow, what else do we have here? Zero-sum game, building a financial system outside of the state, and so on, blah, blah, blah. The zero-sum game is also a ridiculous argument. And here we have the building of a financial system outside of the state, not a disadvantage, an advantage. I mean, we want to separate money and state just like we might want to separate money and church, or whatever, I mean, separation. There just has to be a separation. This is the best part, that Bitcoin separates money and state, that Bitcoin is a non-political money. That's just so brilliant. But they obviously think that's bad, because they want control, they want power, and so on. But I'd really like to know what you think about it. I'd really be interested. So I find it really, the criticism here is really out of touch. And now I have an absolute recommendation for you all. Check this out.
Bitcoin Beginner Workshop in the unique atmosphere of number 1. Bitcoin Hotels in Blochingen. In our 2-day course, you'll learn what Bitcoin really is, how the blockchain works, and why Bitcoin is shaping the future of finance. Our experienced expert Daniel Troster from the Sound Money Bitcoin podcast will give you practical advice on how to buy Bitcoin safely, manage, and apply. He places a special focus on storing with a hardware wallet. This course is perfect for beginners. Secure your spot now and save €50 with the code Bitcoin.
I'll also put a link down below where you can actually sign up for the beginner workshops. They're always very, very popular. And now I'm saying goodbye from Paraguay. See you later. See you later. Peace out.